Hello, everyone. Welcome to Big Ideas in Supply Chain. I'm thrilled to be here today. My name is Allen Jacques. I am an industry thought leader with Kinaxis, focusing on life sciences. I'm very happy to be joined by Peter Bolstorff, Executive Vice President of Innovation and Business Intelligence at the Association for Supply Chain Management, ASCM. So, Peter, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am the Executive Vice President, as mentioned, for Innovation and Business Intelligence. I started with Apex at the time in 2014 when we acquired the Supply Chain Council. So by volunteer history, I go all the way back to SCOR 1.0 back in 1996. I'm a planning and manufacturing guy by trade with 3M and then Imation. I've authored a book called Supply Chain Excellence, which really is kind of a journal of how to use SCOR in a variety of settings. I've had the great pleasure of working with, on 150 or so projects using SCOR over time. And my biggest challenge as we brought SCOR into the Apex community was really how to build out that formula, within Apex. So that's kind of been my charter. Most importantly, I have two granddaughters. They're 5 and 8, and today on my birthday, by the way, I'm luckily called Papa.
Okay, Peter, speaking of SCOR, I have to tell you, I was SCOR certified over 20 years ago. So not
Congratulations.
But a big announcement was made last year. A huge announcement at the Connect conference. I was there. I saw it. But you announced a total revamp of SCOR that you're now calling SCOR DS. So could you maybe walk us through a little bit of the history of SCOR and
Sure.
How it's different, what the big changes are?
So let me first, I'm going to refer to a graphic, and you can see the new SCOR digital standard was really the output of a 3-year journey. Our board kind of set in place this digital task force that kind of identified how do we migrate, towards this digital future. And so we kind of launched that in 3 phases. Phase 1 was to really launch the digital capabilities model, different conversation for a different day. We did that with Deloitte. Then we launched, how do I get SCOR itself off of a 1,000-page document and into a digital environment where you can easily reference it. And then the phase 3, which is what we just launched last fall, was actually revamping the model itself. And so, as you can see in the graphic, it's brand new. So this wasn't an appendix, kind of a set of changes. It was really just looking at how do we use SCOR to solve the problems that we're going to need to solve in 2030. So we employed about 70 subject matter experts across the globe, and in summary, it really pits 2 infinity loops together underneath a process we call orchestrate, and it's a new process. So those of you are saying, we did add a new one. So the first infinity loop is really what I'll call right to left or left to right, and that's how do we bi-directionally orchestrate demand and supply at the same time, because all of us coming out of the pandemic, we know for sure that it's no longer just, build it and they will come, or it's no longer just give me a forecast and I'll make sure that the supply is there. There are constraints and disruptions on both sides of the equation that need to be reconciled and orchestrated, in the middle. And so that's one big change. The other one, which is kind of emerging, has to do with this whole requirement around ESG, climate, circularity. And that's how do we orchestrate the synchronization of a regenerative supply chain? And it's not just supply chain anymore, right? It's product development and how do we change materials? It's transportation and how do we do the most efficient routing? It's inventory. How do we not throw stuff away? And so those 2 things are really fundamentally different. The other thing that we changed in a big way were the metrics. And so we really looked at resilience as being one great big attribute. We looked at not just cost, but profit. So factoring in revenue. And then the third one was, again, really the rounding out the triple bottom line was sustainability. So how do we think about, material usage, energy consumption, waste, and then how do we add the idea around social? So those are the biggies in terms of what was changed. When we think about, just one more comment on the history, we had gotten to a point with the old SCOR model. Again, you can use the old SCOR model, but the idea was there were too many things happening all at the same time. And the old linear way of thinking about we do this first and this second and this third and this fourth was born out of technology that could only do one thing at a time back in the 90s and 2000s. Well, today that's not the case. Everything happens all at once. And so there's no longer this idea around, sequential linear, calculations. So that was kind of the impetus.
Yeah, I love that, Peter. And I grew up in the cascaded world. Spreadsheets, I've done it with other types of software, but it was very cascaded. It took time. I had a boss who described it once as a dinosaur. You hit it on the tail, and 3 months later it says, ouch. But I love this bi-directional orchestration that you're talking about. I love the all at once. And I would even throw in the idea of concurrent orchestration that, it's like that movie, Everything Everywhere All at Once.
All at once.
Happening
exactly.
At the same time, which allows for very fast decision making. So you mentioned resilience. Resilience is on the top of mind of, most CEOs and obviously most supply chain people. We've been through a lot over the last few years. How do you see supply chain impacting a company's ability to be agile and resilient and anti-fragile, or whatever you want to call it?
The funny thing is we did a great question, Alan. We did a study probably 3 years ago, just before the pandemic, actually, with the Economist Intelligence Unit. And we were looking at how do we really define this idea of what resilience is, right? Because how do we change it from buzzword to operationalization, right? How do we actually improve resilience? And one of the interesting perspectives that we had was there's really two dimensions of resilience. There's operational resilience, which is, hey, I'm being faced with a disruption and I've got to do something now. And so there's a set of processes that you go through to kind of respond to the disruption while it's happening. But more importantly, there's this idea and dimension of strategic resilience. And those are the processes and those things that allow me to learn from this one, put it in a playbook, and future-proof or future prepare, my organizations to be more resilient and be more agile to respond in the future. And what we found was people are putting way too much weight on the operational aspect of it, just like firefighting, right? Think about it like that, and not enough weight on this idea around strategic resilience. And resilience is something that you have to build on both sides of the supply chain. It's not just a supply shock, it's also a demand shock. And all of us lived through the COVID experience, where we experienced both at the same time. And now we're just throwing on more frequent disruptions. Again, we have a stability index collaboration that we're working on with KPMG. And what that data is suggesting is that, you've got more disruptions that are more severe happening more frequently in a wider, diverse thing. Cybersecurity has emerged with, let's say with I'll call it the AI technologies, the chat GPTs, et cetera, and these deep fake videos. Again, so all good things could be used for bad. And so how do you start to, again, future-proof yourself against those kinds of disruptions, which are going to be happening? So again, resilience is something that we're trying to move from buzzword to operationalization.
So I imagine also when getting back to bi-directional, doing everything all at once, um, that has to contribute to resiliency because something happens, you understand the impact immediately, and you can take very quick action.
So if you think about, let's just think about COVID for a minute. So if let's imagine that you had put the tools in place, the processes in place, and the technology in place ahead of the pandemic, in which many companies had at that time, they were able to sense demand shift ahead of the curve and ask the what if question is, why is this shifting? Why is the demand shifting from buying inside of a store to e-commerce at such a weird rate? And if you ask the question and then you came up with the answer that says, oh, it's this weird virus that's going around. And then they're saying, okay, well, what are the implications of that weird virus running around? Border closures. Well, where's our source of supply? Well, we only have one source and it's in a place that has a high risk of border shutdown. Okay, how do we then start to think about multi-sourcing, where it's maybe not in the virus path? So there were companies prior to the pandemic, Alan, that were thinking like that because they had put in motion these ideas around processes and technologies, in the last 5 years, to become more resilient. It's those companies that grew market share during and after the pandemic, while everybody else is still trying to catch up, right? So, yeah.
Oh yeah, I was in supply chain. I mean, I've been mostly in the pharmaceutical industry, but I experienced 9/11. I experienced the Icelandic volcano, the tsunami in Japan, hurricanes in Puerto Rico. And every time it took us days, if not a week, to figure out the impact when something happened. So obviously we were late in reacting. So Peter, we've been talking about technology and it's great. The capabilities we have today are amazing. Let's talk about the people. And thinking about the people in two ways. I'm thinking about the skills we need now in supply chain, because they're very different than they were when I started. And then let's talk about the impact of things. You mentioned ChatGPT, but the impact of machine learning and artificial intelligence on people's jobs and, how that's going to impact them near term and long term.
Great question. So just like technology, what we're finding is jobs are consolidating. So as you become more productive because the tools are more productive, rather than having a distribution requirements planner, a material requirements planner, a master production planner, and you're able to start thinking about demand and supply, or you're able to aggregate the same job across more locations, or you're able to, do tasks around advanced analytics that you weren't doing before because you have, the tools and technologies that are doing some of the things that you had to do by hand, with the spreadsheet. So we see the opportunity for supply chain as good today, if not better than it ever has been. And the tools that are available to use are getting that much more sophisticated, and just allows a supply chain professional to make a bigger impact in a shorter amount of time. And the jobs are still going to be supply chain. The end-to-end supply chain is not going to go away. The question is how do those jobs morph to be able to orchestrate bi-directionally two things? We don't have jobs today that synchronize a regenerative supply chain. Those jobs don't exist. So the question is, well, what does that look like? As we start to think about that, when you think about lifecycle management and substituting recyclable material for this material, or you think about 3D printing, or you think about things that are actually going to make the supply chain more sustainable, we don't have jobs today that help support those kinds of things. So I think the future is bright for supply chain professionals. They just need to continue to learn and adapt as we go. So,
well, and what excites me, Peter, is, I've been a planner before. I've been a forecaster. I mean, you're so bogged down with your job that, it's hard to figure out what's noise and what's the routine and get away from that and then be able to focus on what's really important, what you should be working on. And I think a lot of this new capabilities will free people up to spend more time where they can really add value. That's what I'm excited about. So, and I'm really excited also to see all the supply chain programs in universities. We work with a lot of them, and students are excited about supply chain. They want to make supply chain a career. That's just totally transformed over the last 10 years. So that's okay, Peter. I'm not ending now, but I'm getting close. I want to ask you. We're always trying to think about the future and what we should be preparing for, and what we should be getting ready for, and more importantly, what we should not be getting ready for. So I'd like to get your perspective, or ASCM's perspective, on what trends you see over the next couple of years that we should really be paying attention to as supply chain professionals and as companies.
So again, we're a nonprofit, so I don't feel so bad plugging our top 10 trends, right? So again, we're a .org, right? So each year we publish a top 10 trends, and I work with the committee, the Research, Innovation, and Sensing Committee, that actually puts the trends together. We combine that with then a robot. His name is Leo from Feedly. He goes out into the internet every week and then gathers citations, from the internet, and then kind of looks at that particular trend. Is it rising or falling? And so we have this heat map around this one. So stay tuned. But what we're seeing, we just got through with our first draft of trends that we're seeing that we'll publish for 2024. And for the first time, we've seen a substantial shift. So usually, some fall, rise a couple of spots and some fall a couple of spots. But AI and sustainability are too dominant. So this idea around using technology to become more sustainable is really something that people are pushing forward. The problem with the sustainability, as you've seen in the newspaper, is this idea around greenwashing, and, people saying, but they're not doing. And so putting two things together, I would say, is how do we peopleize technology and AI? So how do we do that? And then how do we operationalize sustainability? So again, you have those two things around people and process being two very important aspects, even as we start to see those two trends shift around. So it's an exciting future, but again, it's going to be supply chain's job to take it from idea to action in both cases, like we always do.
Yeah, I'm really going to be interested in seeing people using the SCOR DS metrics around sustainability, because now we'll be able to measure it in how we can improve it from a supply chain point of view. I understand it's an enterprise effort, but supply chain has a big role in it. Peter, I have one last question for you, and I hope this doesn't knock you off your chair. But if you were the chief supply chain officer of the world, what would be your top priority in supply chain transformation for the bettering of the planet?
Well, so knowing that supply chain, a CSCO even, CSCOs, it's always influence. There's never any command and control. So you never can say, let it be done. That's never going to happen. What I would focus on globally is I would focus on looking at the basic needs and what are those commodities of basic needs. It could be as simple as housing. It could be as simple as food and medicine. What are those basic needs, supply chains? And then how do we optimize those basic needs supply chains for every person on the planet? because I think one of the things that just from an impact standpoint, and again, especially with our work with the Gates Foundation in global health in Africa, is once a person can stop worrying about basic needs and actually focus on things that make the world move, right? As opposed to just being able to put food on the table or roof over your head or medicine to keep me healthy. I think creativity abounds. I think happiness prevails, and all those things, that make the world a better place occur. So again, just to reiterate, I would focus diligently on defining the basic needs supply chains for everybody on the planet, organizing to make those things better so that people can be happier.
If you're a planner, you're taking the mundane, tasks that worry people every day, and you're resolving that for them and giving them time to focus on the creative.
Focus on being happy and what is it that I want to do with my future.
I love that answer, Peter. So we're at the end of the session. Peter, I want to thank you so much for joining us, and I'm looking forward to seeing you probably 3 times over the next 3 months.
Well, so let me, again, another shameless plug, right? So I'm also looking forward, Alan. So Alan and I are going to be co-hosts on our supply chain tour. And so for those of you who don't know what a supply chain tour is, they'll be in the show notes. I would imagine there'll be a link that you can go to. But ASCM, it's a new thing this year, really focusing on young professionals and those that are getting started is how do I have a unique 4D engagement experience around 2 topics, integrated business planning and sourcing, procurement, and supply. Alan and I are co-hosting 2 sessions coming up, one in Hoboken here in July, and then the other one in Anaheim in September. You won't be disappointed you made the investment. So, and Kinaxis stakeholders, you have a special code for a special deal. So take advantage.
So again, Peter, thank you. And if anyone would like to contact Peter or myself, our information is in the info section for the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks to the audience for listening to Peter and myself. And please join our next Big Ideas in Supply Chain. And so long.